put up our PowerPoint. That would be helpful.
Yes. Just to set some ground rules, remember like muting yourself. There will be Q&A towards the end and just presenting. Okay.
Yeah, don't forget the recording.
Okay.
Okay, and we have to inform them that we'll be recording. Yes.
Yeah.
Gail, are you going to cover that?
I don't see the PowerPoint, and I'm having trouble getting to it. Am I doing something wrong?
No, it's not.
I will set it up. Yes.
Oh, okay.
It works for almost for you, Gail.
Jim, you want to start with the introductions?
I was going to ask you to do that.
Oh, okay.
If you would.
For everyone who's participating, I'd like to thank Araceli and Harold Turner for helping us there with NAMI Urban LA. Araceli is amazing. I mean, how she juggles everything's totally beyond me. We have Connie Drexler with the ex-public guardian, because she's been promoted, and now she's in a position that we can really call her and say, we need some help on some things. Louis Leve's he's going to be doing these PowerPoints with us afterwards from here on out. But Connie's been with us for years now and has really kept us up to date on laws and everything. Linda Boyd is with AOT, an amazing lady. I mean, all these people that you're looking at today, they are highly solution oriented. So if there's a way to solve a problem, they don't back away until they find that solution. So we're very fortunate to have everybody on board helping us with it. So Jim and I are going to cover the basics on helping you get the person in the appropriate treatment that they need. And it may not be LPS conservatorship, but we're going to explain a lot. Then Connie's going to explain to us the legality and taking it once the doctor has made the application or initiated the LPS conservatorship. And then Linda Boyd's going to talk to us about another program, which is assisted outpatient treatment, an incredible program that's great if a person has some clarity of thinking and a little bit of reasoning ability. She trains her people, she works with them, and she looks for solutions. And some of the solutions she's come up with just have blown me away. Okay.
Okay. Also, we want to cover some of the house rules, and that is to be respectful of others during this meeting, and to please keep your computer mute at all times until about 4:30, when we'll have questions and answers. Also, that this meeting is going to be recorded, and so for your knowledge, it is being recorded, and so please don't use your name or your conservatee's name or your family's name, because after all, it is being recorded. So you can say reference to my daughter or my son or my husband, that type of thing. Okay, so we're going to start this off. Araceli.
Recording in progress.
Araceli, oh, there you go. This helps a lot. Today we're going to be talking about how one can obtain a conservatorship. It's referred to as LPS, that was formed back about 50 years ago with Lanchman, Petrus, and Short. They were politicians and others that wrote the health laws, and they're still active until today. There's been a few changes along the way. Next slide, please. So today's presentation, of course, Gail Evangelietti, who is the troublemaker and started all of this. Just teasing you, Gail. But thank goodness for Gail. She has helped not only Los Angeles County, but with everything she's taught me, has helped so much out here in Orange County and other counties as well. I'm Jim Farrell. I run an Orange County Conservator Assistance Group, and I help people that are wanting to know about conservatorships and how to obtain one. With us today also is Connie Drexler, Acting Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Mental Health. Louis Leva is Acting Deputy Director of the Public Guardian's Office. Linda Boyd is with the department. She's a Department of Mental Health Supervisor with Assisted Outpatient Treatment Program. And Dr. Sharon, unfortunately, we're not going to have the privilege of having him with us today. And Lisa Wong, who is the Director of Department of Mental Health, will also be presenting today. So we have magnificent lineup. This is an awesome program that Gail has put together. And so let's move forward with this presentation to the next slide, please. If you need to get in touch with either Gail or myself, please write these phone numbers down. If you don't have a chance to get it all written down, well, I'm sure that you can ask again later in the meeting, or maybe we'll put it in the chat.
I think everybody should have a PowerPoint. So if they print out their PowerPoint, they'll have this.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Next slide. LPS conservatorship. What exactly is that? I had a mother asking me that very question today. And of course, the essence is all about medication, but it's also about the involuntary mental health treatment where somebody lacks insight into their mental illness. And because of that, they are gravely disabled, meaning that they lack capacity to provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter, and need to be on their medication. So really, it's the courts are trying to keep the people on their medication so they regain and maintain their level of functionality in the mental capacity, and do not allow them to go off the medications. Next page. And I just did Gail's slide. I apologize.
That's okay. It's we believe that the LPS conservatorship, the involuntary treatment, is a tool that's used to help a person regain their life and get into recovery. It's not cured. Their illness is not cured, but they can definitely get into recovery. They can get married. They can have jobs. They can do everything that everybody else can. And the earlier you get treatment for a person, the better the recovery and the quicker it takes for them to actually get into recovery. We don't want people to get so sick that they're living on the streets. And of course, the system fights against you. So we're going to give you the tools to use to try and get your loved one in treatment, but you have to fight every inch of the way, but you'll have the tools for it. Next slide. The first thing that we want you to do is acquire resources. If you don't have resources, most of the hospitals will just discharge almost immediately. And we're going to help you fill out put together a written case for treatment, and you will use that case to get these resources. SSI, supplementary income, SSDI, Social Security disability income, or Social Security. You call Social Security, you do not ask them, do not say, I am applying for my daughter, my son, or whatever. They'll basically say, well, you can't apply and goodbye. What you do is you say, and this is very important, I would like for you to help me fill out the forms so I can give it to the social worker at the hospital or their doctor or whoever it is, and let them get the person to sign the papers. Medi-Cal and Medicare are the same, and you can have private insurance along with Medi-Cal and Medicare. They have to sign for those. So don't worry about it. Just get those forms filled out as soon as they go in the hospital. Give it to the social worker and let the social worker deal with getting them to sign it. If they don't sign it, don't worry about it. It's all the more reason for involuntary mental health treatment. Using the mom and dad's bank account is an absolute no. Put your money away unless you want to kiss your retirement away and there goes all your vacations. Basically, let them use the county resources, but you will be there to help. And we will talk about CalAble, which is another resource that you can put money in. But if they're under SSI and you put money in and you're helping them, they will cut down how much money they get on SSI. So you'll end up paying more money in the long run. Next slide. You can have private insurance as well as Medi-Cal and Medicare. Again, I said, ask Social Security to help you fill out the forms. This is the only time you do not say, I am applying for Social Security or SSDI or SSI. Do not use those words, okay? Medicare is usually given 2 years after you receive Social Security disability income. But if you can prove that the person's been ill 2 years prior, when you're calling up and you're trying to get SSDI, if you have proof that they've been ill for 2 years, they usually will give you Medicare at that time. Okay, next slide. Jim?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that basically when you are needing to hospitalize your loved one, you need to build a very powerful, concise case for treatment. The psychiatrist that is either in the house that's with the CAT team, or if they're in the hospital and the doctor's going to look at them. It was Carla Jacobs that wrote a law and incorporated that into the Welfare Institution Code that primarily says that mental illness ebbs and wanes from day to day, sometimes from minute to minute. And so that when somebody's being evaluated, it's very difficult for them to really get a clear picture of what's going on with this individual and what their needs are. And so consequently, the law says that the families can keep a detailed document, you might say, of the illness and the current conditions, whether they've been homeless, how many times they've been in the hospital prior. And that information actually becomes the very powerful, concise case, as Gail refers to it. It's just like you're going to court, trying to prove your case. You're trying to prove that your loved one needs to be on conservatorship. So make sure that you provide that, and we'll go to the next slide and we'll look at what that looks like.
Okay, let me just add something. You do not need to have medical record for building this case. This is all from your memory and from your mind, but be very truthful. Don't say, I've got to contact the hospital and get those records, or they won't give them to you. They will not give them to you. This is just from your memory. That's all.
Right. And not only is this document, if you want to call it that, so necessary at the time that somebody's being evaluated by a psychiatrist or a CAT team member, but it's also a very useful document when you're applying for your SSI or your SSDI or Medi-Cal. When you request the police or a psychiatric team to hospitalize some person, of course, we want to use it there. If you're requesting AOT services, full service partnerships, or LPS conservatorships, of course, again, it's critically important to have that available. You could provide it to a social worker at a jail to make sure that they give that to the treating doctor and have them on the proper medications. If somebody's going to be in jail for an extended period of time, you could actually initiate a conservatorship within the jail itself, and that would be used by the treating doctor. It could be used in a criminal court case for the public defender to utilize. And also, of course, it can be utilized at a mental health court. Next slide. So what does that look like? The doctors don't have time to read volumes of history on the person and at great length. They have so many other patients they have to also evaluate. So you want to boil it down to like 1 page or 2 pages max. But basically what you'll do is you'll put down the dates, like they were hospitalized May 1st, the hospital, their diagnosis, and so forth, right on down, almost like bullet points down the page. And this will allow a doctor to look at the history and go, gosh, this person is just so unstable. They just continuously are relapsing. And he knows that they will continue to relapse unless they get the help they need. And then as well, we want to include information about any sort of medication that they may be allergic to, that they have diabetes, they have Blue Cross insurance. Doesn't say anything here about asthma, but there are medications that are given for asthma that can actually exacerbate it and can be life-threatening. So if you have any medical conditions, you want to include those. Next slide. Include at the bottom of the history page a list of allergies, medications that they should not have. Haldol for some people works really well. For others, it can make their tongue swell and cut off their airways. If they've had any medical problems, if they have diabetes, heart conditions, all that's critically important. And then, of course, what sort of resources are available to pay for that hospitalization? Do they have SSI, Medicare, Medi-Cal, private insurance? We want to list that at the bottom of the history page. Next slide.
A lot of your, is that
I'm
mine
sorry.
or yours, Jim?
That's mine. It's just off in the right corner there.
Oh, okay.
So forgive me, I hit it off to the right, Gail.
Okay.
In addition to the history, you also want to list what kind of DSM-5 behaviors. In other words, what are they actually saying to you? If they're seeing ghosts, they're seeing people with long pointed chins or big noses. Maybe they laugh or smile for no apparent reason, or they hear the television speaking to him or her, and not the normal show. The FBI they believe that the FBI is telling them or her what to do, and you can just read on down the list. They may have rapid speech where they're talking continuously in a monologue. These are the type of things that you want to list to give the doctor further insight into what's going on with your loved one. Next slide. Gail?
Oh, it's mine. Okay. If a category doesn't fit your loved one, delete the whole thing. But if it does, you can add 2, 3, 4, however many examples you need. Bullet those. Be sure it sounds like mental health. For instance, if you're saying they keep their room messy, you've qualified every teenager in America. But if their room is uninhabitable, that's a different story. So make sure it sounds like mental health. This you can download from the NAMI Urban LA resource website. So you can copy and paste this whole case to a Word document, delete what doesn't apply and add what does. If you have, like, let's say you're using one that's on here, people are running them off the road. People are running, it's a guy and it's running him off the road. If you put him, her, the doctor reads that, he goes, oh, they copied this from someplace, they discount it. This is specific to your loved one. So take the her off. Be sure it all replies to your loved one, and use phrases. Those doctors have heard it all before in one form or another. To you, this is all new. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so unbelievable. But believe me, a schizophrenic, a person with schizophrenia, bipolar, they've done these things and the doctors have heard it all before. Next slide. Okay. Some of the things that tend to run through people with serious mental illness, and I'm not talking mental health problems, I'm talking serious mental illness. They tend to have heightened sexual delusions. Mom's molested them, dad have, they've been gang raped. They may be 70 years old, but they're going to have a baby tomorrow. All sorts of strange things. And that's very real to them. Imagine yourself having a nightmare. You don't think, this doesn't make sense. I'm here one minute, there the next. It doesn't make sense. You don't think that when you're having a nightmare. You don't think of right and wrong. There's no conscience. You just go through the motions in a nightmare. They're basically in a nightmare too, and you're trying to get them out of that horrible state. So when they wake up, they may or may not remember anything. When you wake up from your dream, how many dreams do you really remember? Not very many. So when they do things and they're in a psychotic state, it is their reality. If you would be better off, if you want to save your stress level, if you're trying to convince them that there's a problem, they need to go to the doctor, and they see you as having the problem, go stand in front of a concrete wall and mentally or talk that concrete wall to moving over 1 inch. When you accomplish that, now go talk to your loved one because you're ready to handle them. Otherwise, it just isn't going to happen because their reality is not your reality. And this is where you need the help. People, in this case, be sure on all these categories, you put if they wear their clothes excessive times, periods of times, that's a health risk. If they're not eating, if they're eating food out of the garbage, and it's green, put that down if it's not, if it's not healthy food. Because sometimes you'll get judges at the court who goes, well, they, they can find food in the dumpster. That's not healthy food, but you'll get a judge every now and then that might say, oh, that's just fine. They can feed themselves. That's not what the law is supposed to be. But, we're not going to fight the laws. We're going to just help you to get the treatment your loved one needs. Next slide. Tips when you're putting this together, do not mention substance abuse. If they ask you about it when they go to the hospital, they run tests and they know what they're on. When they ask you about it, your statement to them is, I am sure because of their mental illness, they are self-medicating. The moment you start talking about substance abuse, this is a substance abuse problem, we're going to discharge them. And that's exactly what they will do. The hospital will do. Now, if they go to the hospital because they're ODing on substance abuse and you know what they've taken, by all means, tell them that's in a medical hospital. That's not in the mental health. But if they're going because of mental health, it is, I am sure because of their mental illness, they are self-medicating. As to violence, if you start putting in that symptoms, they beat the crap out of their mom or something like that, good luck finding a treatment facility that will take them. They've become a liability. So our suggestion is just say they are highly aggressive towards their mother, towards the neighbors, whatever. You don't want to play up too much, but you want to play up enough. There's a fine tuning in that. Just say they're highly aggressive because nobody will take them when they become a liability. When they're at the hospital doctor is going to say, they don't meet the criteria for the LPS conservatorship. Will you be taking them home? We're going to discharge them at 3 o'clock. Well, yeah, it's my kid. Of course I'm going to take them home. The hospital was correct. They did not meet the criteria for involuntary mental health treatment because, and we'll be going back over this, on gravely disabled. The law says if they cannot provide for their food, clothing, and shelter, they're considered gravely disabled. But if somebody else provides for it, they are not considered gravely disabled. Next slide. Wait a second. I just messed everything up. Common symptoms. I mentioned they can become racial against everybody who's not them. A friend of mine, her son was Black and he could not stand Black people. And she says, I don't get it. He's Black. Heightened sexual delusions. They tend to get extremely heightened sexual. FBI, CIA, other people are following them. And of course, they're not ill, but everybody else is, so, and that is their reality. They're fine, but you have a problem. Next slide. Let me just say, on your case, at the bottom on another sheet of paper, write 3 open-ended questions. And I think we talk about that later on. That when the pet team or somebody comes out to get them, just one second. Excuse me, Sai, can you get Coco and let her in? Okay. Our dog's a princess. She goes out the back door and has to come in the front door. Basically, write 3 open-ended questions that will set them off. When you have the police come out, they'll be very nice, very calm. Some people are like this, some are not. And the police are like, why are we going to take them? They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. And NAMI will tell you, oh, you want to keep everything calm and all. Well, police leave and guess what you've got? Back to the same situation you had before. So if you have 3 open-ended questions, things that affect them, for instance, I understand the FBI's been following you. What can we do to help you with this situation? You're not saying they're lying or that isn't true or don't believe that. You're just giving them, the police, a question to ask them, and that may set them off. If that one doesn't, they have 2 others that they can work with. I understand your parents have been taking all of your money. How can we help you with this situation? that sort of thing. So those are the things that you want to do to be able to get your loved one in the treatment they need so that they can get into recovery. Do not, until you're under that LPS conservatorship, say anything positive about them because it will be used against you. For instance, well, they were in a board and care for about a month and they did pretty well. Guess where they're going? Right back to that board and care. So you don't say anything positive. You don't lie, whatever you do, but you kind of embellish a little bit. Sometimes you have to get what you need to get them treatment. Okay, Jim?
Gail covered pretty much the information that's on this slide, but gravely disabled, and I did as well. But a person with a serious mental illness cannot, because of their illness, provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter. Any one of those individually, not all of them. But on the other hand, if somebody else can provide for their food, clothing, or shelter in a safe manner, then they will not be considered gravely disabled, and the LPS conservatorship will not be granted. And that's, as Gail had said, that they're living in a tent under the bridge, they're eating out of a garbage can. That's not safe, and nor is it a safe place to live. We would hope that the judge would not consider that to be safe. But these are really the primary criteria of being gravely disabled, and one must be gravely disabled in order to receive a conservatorship. Next slide. Continuing, if again, under shelter, you want to stress that they cannot come home to live. They have no place to live safely. They cannot handle a shelter or board and care safely. They've lost a significant amount of weight from not eating. They're paranoid of food. They believe it's poisoned, or maybe they're overweight because of compulsive eating. I remember one time a family called me and said, "Jim, we talked to you and the CAT team's here and they're not going to take our loved one." And I said, "This is for your son?" "Yes." "Put them on the phone." And I thought, wow, I've never done this before. So the CAT team says, "Who is this?" I said, "This is Jim Farrell. The parents have a concern that you're not going to be able to take their son in for on a 5150. I do know that he's on an insulin pump, and the son believes that it's poisoning him, so he has shut the insulin pump off. And he's at danger and risk because of that." "Oh, we didn't say we're not going to take him," and they did take him. But these are areas where people believe that food that we all need or medication that we need is in fact poisoned. Clothing, it's something that actually happens more often than others to people who are bipolar, but they may think it's very appropriate when it's not appropriate to take all their clothing off, walk down the street in that sort of a manner, or catch a bus or something, thinking that it's okay. And if it's a guy especially, the police come and they want to arrest him for indecent exposure. So you really want to stress to law enforcement and to the hospitals, your son or your daughter has a very severe case of mental illness, and that they're not out there doing something devious. It's just they don't fully understand what they're doing, and they lack insight into the illness, and therefore, because of that, they may have stopped taking their medication, and they're not in compliance of staying balanced out with their mental health. Next slide, please, Araceli. So you need to kind of come up with a direction for treatment. And it may be one or D all the above, but there's the recovery model, which is FSP. It's a full service partnership. And that is a program that's funded through taxations, along with the millionaires. I believe that's the one. Basically, here in Orange County, there's several different branches of full service partnerships, and they provide a lot of counseling. They also have substance abuse programs in some of them. It may be that what they need is a assisted outpatient treatment, AOT. It's referred to Laura's Law, and it's basically where they don't quite match the requirements for a conservatorship, and it's a program that utilizes mental health care workers that come out and talk to the person, and they involve judges in this, and we try to get them into compliance of taking their medications. Ultimately, they could be put onto a conservatorship if that fails and they meet criteria. And the last, of course, is your LPS conservatorship. So between number 2 and number 3 here, if they qualify for LPS conservatorship, then they're not going to be appropriate for AOT. Or if AOT is going to be appropriate and they don't need to be on a conservatorship, then they would not be placed there. So LPS is an involuntary treatment. We don't like to think of it as being involuntary or against their own wishes, but when they lack capacity to do what's best for their own health and safety, it becomes a necessity. Next slide, please. Again.
Oh, it's over the numbers to the right. I don't see it. Hospitalizing a person. If a person is harm to themselves or harm to others and a flight risk, call 911. Don't wait. Do not wait for them to harm somebody. If they're getting aggressive, if they're talking about hurting people, call the police immediately. Don't call a week later and say, well, they were talking about hurting somebody last week. The police can't do anything at that point. But if it's harm to self and harm to others, call the police immediately and demand that they be placed on a 5150 and taken to the hospital, not to the jail. Ask when the police come out, have your history, symptoms in that gravely disabled paper that you put together. The police usually come in an unmarked car. You meet them down the street a little bit. You tell them what's going on and give them a copy of that paper. That helps a lot. It helps them to write up the case a little bit better and to ask the appropriate questions that they need to ask. Also get the cards from the police, know who they are. And when they take them to the hospital, they can tell you where they're taking them because that's civil. Once the person crosses the thresholds in the hospital, now HIPAA takes place. So it's civil and they can tell you where they're taking them. If the person is more gravely disabled, call the access team. But if they're flight risk, ask them to please bring the police. They can also be harm to self and harm to others, but if it's not imminent where they're going to do it like right now, then you can call the access team. The police tend to come quicker. The access team, it might be 24 hours or even a little bit longer. When school is in session, if the access is on the way to your house, they say, we're on our way, we're coming over, and they get a call from a school that there's a suicide attempt or a problem, they have to divert to the school first. They don't have a choice, and you'll be sitting there waiting. It's okay to call them back and say, I'm waiting, are they coming? And they will give you an update. Have your 3 open-ended questions that will demonstrate the person's psychosis. Those are the questions we talked about earlier. So if it's harm to self and harm to others, call the police immediately. If it's gravely disabled, maybe they won't come out of their room, they're not eating, they're losing a lot of weight, you can call access team. Okay, next slide. Hospitalization, and Connie's going to go over a lot of this, but just generally, a 5150 is also known as a 3-day hold or a 72-hour hold. That's where they can hold them up to 3 hours, 3 days on a 5150. But they have to have that evaluation and the doctor has to evaluate them. A 5250 is also known as the 14-day hold. Within first 4 working days, they will have a probable cause hearing at the hospital. You may or may not even know about it. And this is where the doctor will state that we need to keep the person for up to the full 14 days. They normally don't keep them all the 14 days, but they can if they want to. Then you have an intensive care, which is 30-day intensive care hold, and you have a temporary conservatorship. Connie's going to go over this, so I'm just going to briefly just breeze through it. It is after the probable cause hearing that if the doctor is going to initiate the LPS conservatorship, they do it after that probable cause hearing because it's a lot of paperwork and a lot of work. If he does it beforehand and they don't find that the hospital can keep the person for the 14 days, they've done a lot of work for nothing. Okay, next slide. How to acquire the LPS conservatorship. It is generally the treating doctor in the hospital or the jail who initiates the LPS conservatorship. This is not the law, it is the practice. As a family member in the state of California, you cannot go and actually request the LPS conservatorship. But when they're in the hospital or the jail, you can give your history, symptoms, and gravely disabled information to the treating doctor and ask the treating doctor to initiate the LPS conservatorship. Hopefully they will. You're going to have to, the two big obstacles you have is getting the person in the hospital and getting the doctor's jail or hospital doctor to initiate the LPS conservatorship. I'm not going to say you're home free at that point because you're not, but those are your biggest obstacles. When now they do have a pilot project, Connie's going to talk about that a person is not in the hospital or in jail and they can initiate the LPS conservatorship. So next slide. When they're in the hospital, be sure to give that written case to the treating doctor as soon as possible. Do not assume that the police have given it to the hospital because chances are they haven't. So every step of the way, if you're going to criminal court, take it, if it's printed and you're not faxing it or emailing it, and you're printing it, print it on a light colored yellow paper or something, so it stands out among all the white papers, then they can find it quicker. Request the treating doctor to initiate the LPS conservatorship, but remember that won't be done until after the probable cause hearing at the hospital. Okay, next.
So LPS via jail. To initiate a LPS conservatorship in jail, there has to be sufficient time for that to be processed. They may or may not be able to initiate it if there's not sufficient process. But just as though your loved one were put into the hospital, if they've been put into the jail, you can request that the treating doctor at the jail initiate the LPS conservatorship. So you want to provide the treating doctor your written case for treatment. And of course, then you'd want to contact the public defender that's representing your loved one and ask that the mental health liaison be involved in the case. And ask the public defender to request a jail diversion program. Next slide.
I just want to say something on the jail diversion.
Surely.
If the person gets the jail diversion, it's a good thing still to get the LPS conservatorship. It's kind of like your insurance policy that the person will be able to complete the program. Because usually those programs are 18 months to 2 years. When they complete the jail diversion, many times their cases are totally dismissed. But if they're on medication and they decide to go off the medication, if they're under the LPS, you can get them back in the hospital immediately. If they're not under the LPS, they may not make it through their program, their jail diversion program, and then they go back to court and whatever takes place. Louis Leve will know a lot about this. He understands the jail system very well. Okay. Jim?
So, yeah, primarily the California Welfare and Institution Code 5008.2 says the law requires that all healthcare providers shall take your information and the historical course of the person must be taken into account for treatment. Just today, I was talking to a parent, and some of these hospitals are not real good about taking the information. And it's as though they don't know what the law is about. If it's ever refused, you can just point out to them, you know, it's really in the Welfare Institution Code, it's law that you must receive this information from me, and that you need to apply that information to the assessment of our loved one. The court stated that harm may be through neglect or inability to care for oneself. Therefore, if they lack the provisional sense to care for themselves due to the mental illness, then they meet the criteria for 5150. Again, it gets back to the point of them being gravely disabled, as we before described. Next slide, please. So what is the criteria for LPS conservatorship? The LPS conservatorship is California's involuntary mental health treatment for recovery. You must have both a very serious mental illness and be gravely disabled. It helps a person with no insight into their illness, and is also being non-compliant with treatment and medication. So really the essence of conservatorship is that the courts will mandate that this individual remain on their medication and that they cannot go off of it. And if they do, they could be rehospitalized. Next slide, please. A serious mental illness. What sort of illnesses does that refer to? Bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, clinical depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, or chronic alcoholism. We find it very difficult for a lot of hospitals to accept alcoholism as meeting criteria, but it's supposed to be. All of these are very serious illnesses, and they meet criteria for being placed onto a conservatorship. Next slide.
Great. Can I just say something about clinical depression?
Sure.
Depression, if they just have the depression and not the mania, transcranial magnetic stimulation is extremely helpful. They're having great success with that. They put like a little cap on the person's head and they just give a little bit of an electrical impulse. It's just a mild thing. The person just hears like a little sound. It stimulates the nerve endings so that it brings out the happy sense, you might say. It really helps with controlling and curing the clinical depression. I just wanted to bring that to you. So if you have somebody in that state, I certainly would investigate that. Oh,
thank you,
mine? Okay.
Why don't you go on to this next slide?
And I just want to say, things that we're telling you, we're making strong suggestions. You are in the moment. You know your loved one better than anybody. If something doesn't apply or you're uncomfortable with something, do what you feel is right. Don't do, well, Gail or Jim said to do this. You do what you feel is right. Right or wrong, you don't know. Nobody has, that 20/20 vision ahead. So just do the best you can and never blame yourself for anything, whatever happens. Okay, types of conservatorship. You have two types for under the LPS conservatorship. You have the conservatorship of the person, and that's where the treating doctor in the hospital will initiate the conservatorship with the public guardian's office. Once the public guardian office gets it, call and ask who is the person assigned to the case. Give them a copy of the history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, and talk to that person. If you choose to be conservator, let that public guardian know that you would like to be the conservator. And they will take you all the way through the court. The public guardian is the one who petitions the court for the temporary LPS conservatorship, investigates the need for the permanent conservatorship. Now, by permanent, LPS is only good for 1 year. You have to renew it every year. You also have, and it's through the doctor, the treating doctor, that you get the conservatorship of the person. There's an LPS conservatorship of the estate. If you don't have it of the person, you cannot have it of just the estate. You request the conservatorship of the estate through the public guardian's office, or you can ask the court. And if you don't get it, if you're not requesting it initially and you go, I really need this, and 2 months, they're under the conservatorship for 2 months, and you're finding out they have debts, they have criminal cases, they have other things, then basically you can go back and you can request it later on. You don't have to do it right when the conservatorship of the person is being granted. Next slide. Probate conservatorship is an entirely different conservatorship, and that's for people who do not have a mental illness. It's generally for older people, but it can be for younger people. If you have brain tumor, brain damage, stroke, autism, Alzheimer's, anything else that is not that list that Jim had showed you earlier. If it's not on that list, then it would be probate conservatorship. And probate is good for life unless the person requests to be taken off of that. Next. The conservatee, when a person's placed under a conservatorship, you guys have heard a lot of things like, I think Nancy Grace, when she was talking about Britney Spears saying, oh, she can't even get a cup of Starbucks coffee without her conservator's permission. That is so untrue. Basically, the rights that a person loses is the basic fundamental, the right to refuse medication. That's your essence of the LPS conservatorship. Temporarily suspended are the rights to enter contracts, the right to drive a car, and the right to possess and shoot a gun. The right to drive a car, while they are under the conservatorship, they can get that right back. The right to enter contracts, they can get that right back while they're under the conservatorship. So they are only temporary. Now, if the public guardian is the conservator, then they're not going to agree to let them drive the car or enter contracts because that can be a liability. But if you choose to be the conservator, you are not liable for anything that person does or doesn't do. But let's say they've lost the right to drive a car. You give them the keys to the car and you say, here, go get some milk down at the store, and they have an accident. You are liable because you initiated that. If they took the keys to the car without your permission, you're not liable. Okay, next. The rights of the conservator. As a conservator, all your rights are is to approve or disapprove treatment, placement, and medication. And these are powerful. If you have a quack doctor that wants to put them on a smorgasbord of medications, you can say no. If they want to keep them on a medication that's causing a lot of problems, you can say no. Placement. The county will help. You don't look for places, or you can, but the county will help you to find like an IMD or different places. Wherever you're going to put them, go and look at that place. Some of those places are not very nice. And you know your loved one the best. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have somebody who they're paranoid about people being close to them, but they have to go to an IMD. There's some IMDs, they pack them in like sardines. That person would be very uncomfortable. They have some IMDs that are more like a nursing home for very low functioning people, and you have a very bright person on your hand. They would be very uncomfortable. Or a person that needs dual diagnosis, substance abuse, and once you get the LPS or they get into treatment, they can do the dual diagnose. If they are on dual diagnosis, then, and they're selling drugs across the street from your IMD, that's not really an appropriate place for them. So use your discretion. You can explain why you don't want them at that place, and they'll give you other selections to go to. So those are things just to think about. You also have the right to work with the doctor to approve or disapprove medications for the conservatee. Now, you have to be careful. Some doctors will want to remove you as a conservator because they want to do it their way. So be sure you document why you are saying no. And you can also find another doctor if you can. If they're working like they're in a treatment facility, you're kind of stuck with that doctor. But if you know what you're doing and why, you can take that to court and you can plead your case. Somebody asked a question about what is an IMD. The term is an Institute for Mental Disease. It's a treatment facility. It's a lockdown treatment facility where a person is given all sorts of treatment. They have therapy, programs, activities, where in the hospital it's like a holding cell. There's nothing to do in the hospital except watch TV and sleep. And some IMDs have a lot more treatment programs and activities that is very good. And they'll let you, as a person gets into recovery, you can go and take them out for lunch and have a good time, do all that sort of thing. Okay, next slide.
Can I just comment on this too? Is
Sure.
What I see here in Orange County, and it's probably the same in every county, but in the most recent years, I see people going into all of our major hospitals throughout the county, and next thing you know, they're being transferred out of county and they're being transferred all over the place. That happened to our family with one of the hospitals here in Orange County, and they shipped him out to a hospital that I knew was not appropriate for our son's care. And so I called the hospital and I said, as a conservator, I had the right to approve or disapprove of our son's treatment, placement, and medication. And I had the right to go to that facility to see if it was appropriate for our son's needs, and it's not. And I've talked to other people. Connie Drexler's name came up, and we had talked about this other hospital and how it's not really appropriate for people to be put there. Now Connie's never going to talk to me again. But I said, you need to send the ambulance back out, pick up my son, and put him back in your hospital because I do not approve of his placement. And I said, well, thank you. We didn't know that. Thank you for educating us. And it took a few days, but they put him back into the same hospital they took him out of. So I'm very concerned about conservatives being taken out of a hospital and placed, especially if it's out in San Bernardino. Some of those hospitals out there are not appropriate for mental health treatment. And we need to make sure that if they're going to be placed somewhere, they're going to get the appropriate treatment. That's all I wanted to add to it. So who should be the conservator? Well, families, number one, can be the conservator, but also the public guardian's office. Let's say the family has some reason why they can't do it, either emotionally or other problems may come into it. The public guardian's office can take over the conservatorship. And so that's a public conservatorship versus a private conservatorship. The upshot of that is that you're able to place a person in a state-approved facility, and there's less stress for the family member, and they do have a lot more clout in getting people appropriately placed in board and cares and whatnot. The downside is that you'll have less involvement with the recovery process. You have no control over the medication, and you don't really have access to what's going on with the treatment process unless something has been signed by your loved one that says you can be notified of that type of information. So you want to work to establish a working relationship with the public guardian's office if in fact they are the ones that are taking over the conservatorship. Make sure that they have the mental health history, let them know basically how they can best serve your sons or daughters or other person's needs. And Connie's going to go over that in greater detail later, so that's enough. Next slide. So again, pros of being a conservator is you have direct contact with the doctor, you can reject inappropriate treatments. The conservative on the negative side will always manipulate you, get you to do things you don't want to do, or at least try. And the hospital try to push you around and discharge the patient to a facility not appropriate for the level of care that's required. And again, Connie's going to touch on this. Next slide.
I just want to say something. When you get the conservatorship and your loved one's in the hospital, basically to get into an IMD is a lockdown treatment facility. So the person has to go from a lockdown to a lockdown. If a hospital says, okay, we've got them on the list for the IMD, go ahead and take them home. And when they open up when there's a bed available, we'll let you know and you can put them in there. Do not take them. Hospitals will tell you things that aren't true. You're going to know the laws, and they've been put up here, and everybody can get a hold of this PowerPoint. But if you take them out of the hospital, they are not eligible for an IMD. They have to go from a lockdown to a lockdown, either from the jail or the hospital to the IMD. So be cautious if a hospital says something to you like that. That's not true. If that happens, if it's in Orange County, call Jim. If it's in LA, you can call me and I will put you in touch with the person who will take care of that problem. Okay, next slide.
So the normal LPS process, it starts with a 5150 where the individual is picked up, they're transported to the hospital, placed on a 72-hour involuntary hold. If they, in fact, agree that the person needs continued care, then they can be put onto an additional 14-day hold. And following that, the 30-day hold, or what they refer to as a TCON, which is temporary conservatorship. So after 4 days of a 14-day hold, a probable cause hearing occurs, which allows the hospital to keep the patient for the 14 days and so forth. The probable cause hearing, the doctor can initiate the 30-day TCON. Again, I don't want to talk too much on this because Connie's going to cover some of this later, as I understand. Next slide. So in a court hearing, the patient is assigned to a public defender. The patient can request a court hearing where the judge will decide whether they'll be placed onto a conservatorship. They can even, the patient can request that they be put onto a jury trial. The people on the jury probably, as I understand it, will not know very much or maybe nothing at all about mental illness. So those are the patient's rights. And also know that the law provides a group called Patients' Rights, and they will, while they're in the hospital, inform them of their legal rights. So they'll be well armed and will advise the person when they go into the courtroom what to choose. Depends on the individual. Next slide, please. Yeah.
The mental health court is called Department 103. It's in the Hollywood courthouse. And the proceedings, Connie's going to go over that because with COVID, they started doing WebEx. So people were not going to the courthouse. They've kind of opened it up a little bit now. I'm not that well versed in what they are doing in LA. And by the way, I've kind of been reading few people are saying, asking questions about this. The principles that Jim and I are telling you about are good to use all over the country. If you put together a well-written history, symptoms, and gravely disabled information, I have found people have had success in getting treatment in other states, in other counties, Northern California, which is terrible, but in other counties also. It's a good tool to help you get your foot in the door. They may slam the door on your foot, but you got your foot in the door. So it's a good help on that. I know Linda Boyd with AOT, when she gets a copy of one of those, it really helps them to do a better evaluation of the individual. So be sure to put together, use that same format, copy and paste it, just delete what doesn't apply and add what does. And I think that will help. If you're in another county, you can call and maybe we can muddle through what their changes are. And I'll give you the laws are the same throughout California. Is how they implement the laws. In Ventura County, you can have 2 people be the conservator. In LA County, it's 1, but I think they're opening it up now till 2. Connie, maybe you can address that when you get to that point. Okay, next slide. After the LPS is granted, the hospital's supposed to hold the patient until a proper facility becomes available. The intensive care division, the hospital should request that they do an evaluation for the patient for placement. The level of care is determined by clinical recommendation. While they're waiting in the hospital, and IMD beds they're coveted. So it's hard to get into one, and they may have to remain in the hospital for maybe 4 or 6 months. But while they're in the hospital, you can work with the treating doctor to get them on the appropriate medications for clarity of thinking. And that's really what you want. The least side effects and the best clarity of thinking. And if you can work for one medication, that would be the best thing. If they're clearing up in the hospital and they're doing well and they're not a flight risk, they may be able to skip an IMD and go to a step down called enhanced residential housing, depending on how quickly they get better. But that's the normal step is you usually go from the hospital or the jail to an IMD, to a step down, to a board and care or sober living, and then outpatient treatment where they can live in an apartment. They can be under the LPS through all of these. And when the renewal comes up, some patients want to remain under the LPS because it's their safeguard to keep them from going back to becoming gravely disabled again, from decompensating to stage 4 of this illness. We don't want people to be that ill. So, we're trying to get patients to understand with treatment, they're going to get their life back. And that's really what we want. Okay, next slide. By the way, it is only the hospital that they can force medications. So if somebody's at an IMD and they decide to go off their medications, the class tomorrow on Sunday, we'll be talking about that. But you can get them back in the hospital and they can give them the medication. And if you do it quickly, then it's usually they just go to the hospital, get the medications. Chances are they're not going to do that again. The longer you wait, the longer they'll end up being in the hospital. So, suggestions for recovery. Once you get that LPS conservatorship, I suggest you get your photo album. You remember what they were like before they get ill, and that is your recovery level to seek. Do not settle. A lot of doctors, they'll be sitting in the corner and they're like a zombie. That's the best you're going to get. No, it isn't. Seek a different medication that will give them recovery. What medication works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And I'll give you an example. The feedback that I give, and remember, I'm just sharing what I learned from others. I would say 85% have pretty good success with Invega, especially the shot. But 15% of them approximately is disaster. Vraylar is a newer one. I've had 8 people on it that I'm aware of. 7, it was like, whoa, this is a miracle drug. They don't have a shot for that yet. The 7th one, it was disaster. So you have to, unfortunately, it's trial and error on the medications. Therapy is extremely important. By the way, on medications, especially if you're the conservator, know every medication they're on, research those medications, know the high and low dosages, when you should start to see a difference in the medications, and know all the side effects. Keep in mind, even aspirin's side effect is death. So you kind of take a lot of that with a grain of salt. But if you're seeing something, there might be a problem. You might have to try a different med. Try to stay away from a smorgasbord of medications. Now, if they have a medical problem, we don't even go there. But on mental health, you want to find which medication works the best for them, at what amount, and then go from there if you have to add another one. Cognitive therapy is vital because if they don't have that therapy, and most of therapy now is done online and patients love it. They can do group therapy or private therapy. And most people, when they're under the therapy, after they've had the therapy for the day, you see a happy person. It's kind of nice to be around them. Addiction treatment. This is now when you're talking about substance abuse, and get them in addiction treatment is vital because the medications aren't going to keep them from doing their addiction, but it's going to make them feel better. So chances are they're not going to be wanting to do all that substance abuse. Next slide. Be sure to educate yourself. Take that free family-to-family class. Urban LA and all around the country, they have NAMI offers a free family-to-family class. I think they've cut it from 12 weeks down to 8 weeks, depending on where you're taking it from. And many places offer it via the Zoom or whatever program they do. It is the most empowering class that will help you to be able to guide your loved one, whether they're under the conservatorship or not. It teaches you about medications, how to talk with them, how to work with them, what they're thinking, They have a exercise that you kind of get an idea like to be mentally ill. It's not easy. So, a great empowering program. Join NAMI if you can. It's not very expensive, but you'll get a lot of fantastic information. Get involved. The more you get involved, the more you'll be able to help your loved one. So do whatever you can, and you're taking this class, so this tells me you're strong people because a lot of people can't do it. So I'm impressed with what you're doing. Next slide. Keep 2 journals. Keep, first of all, keep a sense of humor, whatever you do, because if you don't keep a sense of humor, you're not going to make it through this. I know in the family to family class, long time ago when I first took it, they had a picture and it was like all these characters were visiting their legislator petitioning for something. And you had Napoleon, you had all these characters. I thought it was the funniest thing and I got the giggles. Well, they didn't think it was so funny in the class, but I see you've got to keep a sense of humor. If you don't, you will not make it through this. Keep 2 journals. Keep a journal of everybody you speak to, including if you call Jim or I, the general gist of what was said. Keep their contact information and what they said. You're going to find some hospitals, the people will say, well, we don't do LPS conservatorships here. If they're not doing an LPS conservatorship and they're a designated facility, and in LA they are, with the exception of Cedars-Sinai, because that's not a lockdown facility, then we call Connie Drexler or we'll call Dr. Wong and let them know, hey, there's a problem here, or Curly Bonds, Dr. Curly Bonds, and they will get on it right away and correct that situation. If they tell you, well, until that person's been at this hospital 5 or 6 times, we don't do the LPS conservatorship. That is not the law, and I would like to see that where it's written in the law. And you can ask them that. Keep nice, always be nice. And if you're not happy with somebody, go to their supervisor and just keep going straight on up the road. But don't lose your cool, whatever you do. Write down their name, okay, you spell your last name Smith, Smith. And what you're telling me is that you don't do LPS conservatorships at this hospital. Am I understanding that correctly? Write it down and we'll report it. We'll get it taken care of. If you don't report these things, they will continue. If we report them, we've gotten so many things corrected. For instance, giving a hospital your information. People would say, we can't take that. Yes, you can. And here's the law that you can. So you have to be nice. Keep a journal of your loved one with the medications they're on and what you're observing, and ask them what they feel. They're pretty honest. They'll tell you, I feel better, or I don't, or I'm having these terrible delusions. They're telling you what it's like. So write those down because that helps you to find the right medication for them. Next. You see this all over town. This is heartbreaking. And when I first came out to LA, I've never seen anything like this in my life. I could not believe what I was seeing. And it's still there, and it's gotten progressively worse. So many of these people are brilliant and they're on the streets. They should not be there. Your loved ones are blessed and fortunate because they have you fighting for them. Don't quit. Whatever you do, don't quit. Keep fighting to give them back their life. You're their only hope. Otherwise, they're going to be like that. Next slide. Same. Next slide. I am my brother's keeper. What we're asking is if it's possible, if you don't, when you're dealing with mental health, you're spending money, and I don't want you to be spending money. But if you do have the ability and you can donate, and you're in a position to do so, please do. But state that this is for the LPS conservatorship. You can donate to NAMI Urban LA. That's the address, and you can put attention Maddie Cobbs. She'll see that it goes to the LPS conservatorship program, because this program is free, but we have a lot of behind the scenes expenses that we have to pay for, and we're trying to spread this out now to the Spanish community. So if you can donate, we are most grateful. If you can't, it's okay. We're not withholding any advice or suggestions or anything at all like that. We will do everything that we can to help you because the goal is to get your loved one back their life as it should be. Next slide. Oh, Jim, that was yours. You want to take the questions?
Okay, the last 3 were in fact. It's like, you were doing so good. You're on a roll. I'm going to let her go. The only thing I wanted to add to that is Gail was talking about medications and and journals and so forth. There's a app called drugs.com and also a website, drugs.com, that lists every medication known to man. And you can find all of the medications that your doctor's prescribing. It will tell you the downsides, the upsides, what to look for, and what normal dosages are, and so forth, and how they are usually increased, what steps to increase them by. And they actually write this, I think, also for doctors, but it's something that anyone can tap into. You should know your medications. If you're going to be a conservator, keep a journal on them.
Recording stopped.
With the other things, you just want to keep a journal on your meds, and I find it a useful app. Okay, we're into the questions.
Jim, thank you.
Yes, so if people want to raise their hand or on the chat, we can go over questions. We do have probably a few minutes before we pass it on to Connie, so we can stay on schedule. I see Margaret raise her hand.
Oh, I have one, but I don't have.
Am I allowed to speak?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for the information that you're providing today. This is my second time attending. I attended 3 years ago, and my loved one, her disease has progressed. At this stage in my life, I've lost a husband, a marriage, a house, a job, and I don't have anything else to give. And my daughter cannot receive care. I am now in a state of desperation. I just now secured housing for myself. I've been homeless for the last 6 months because my husband walked out on us after 3 years of this mental crisis, and just said he couldn't take it anymore. He's now in therapy at the VA. I'm in NAMI. I'm meeting with the priest. I'm in counseling. I'm on medication. I can't do anymore. I can't do anymore. And my loved one is just deteriorating, and I don't know what to do.
Margaret, could you do me a favor? This is in LA, is that correct?
Yes, I'm in NAMI, urban LA, right?
Okay, could you do me a
With
favor?
Harold.
Call me on Monday and let's talk about your case. You have my number, right?
I don't know. I signed on late because I had to go to somebody else's house that had Wi-Fi.
My number's 337-781-7609, and we'll talk about this and try to see what we can do to help your daughter on Monday, okay?
Just
now,
one more.
Keep in mind, I'm on the East Coast, so when you get up and get your cup of coffee, call me. At night, kind of forgo that unless it's an emergency.
So you want me to call you at 6 o'clock in the morning and then it's 9 o'clock there, or is it 6?
Yes, ma'am, you can do that.
No, I don't have a problem. I'll put 6. I'll put 5:30 a.m.
I'm up and about.
Yeah, what we're working on right now is her apartment building owner is trying to get her picked up again.
Okay, well, we'll talk about all that on Monday. We'll do what we can to help you, okay?
Okay, you're such a sweetheart. I appreciate it.
All right, are there any questions? Questions are what we need.
Yes. So
Okay.
we do have a limited time, so I think I can take 2 more questions, and then we have to continue with Connie's presentation. But at 4:30, we will have a Q&A with everybody. So I believe Lilia was next with her raised hand, and then Jamie will be the last person for Q&A right now. But feel free to also send them in the chat. We can answer in the chat.
2 quick questions. If my loved one signs a paper in the hospital saying he can communicate with me, can the doctor continue communicating with me? Because I'm fairly new with that paper signed.
That's a release of information. As long as the person's in the hospital, the doctor can communicate with you. They try not to, so it's usually through the social worker that you'll get most of your information. Now, if they're discharged from the hospital and they go back to the hospital, they have to sign another release of information. and they can pull that release of information anytime they want. So usually if they give a release of information, the doctors try to, or somebody tries to reach out with you, but you can always give that hospital that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled. If you're talking with the doctor, the suggestion is bullet what you have to say. Keep it right to the point. If you start talking about all this other stuff, they're out of there. They don't have the time to listen, and they won't. So you keep it to the point. This is what I need. This is what I would like. They're gravely disabled. Those are the things that you push. They are gravely disabled. I would like them under the LPS conservatorship. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
And so the last one we'll take before, or was that the end of your questions, Lilia?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Because we do want to stay on schedule to let all the presenters speak. Jamie will be the last one. Feel free to keep on using the chat, and at 4:30 we'll continue with Q&A.
Am I on?
Yes.
Hear me? Hi. I'm in a unique situation. My parents, this is the problem. My mother has schizophrenia, and she believes aliens live in her attic. And the police have been called from the neighbors. They don't live with me. They live on their own. My dad has Alzheimer's, and he's deteriorating fast. My mom is the sole provider, and she has schizophrenia. She believes aliens and witches live in her attic. Cops have been down. Police don't really seem to care. My parents live in Riverside County. I live in San Diego County. I have been looking high and low, left and right, anywhere for help, support, anything. In fact, while I've been on the Zoom meeting, my mother called and left a frantic message about the aliens attacking her in the house right now. I don't know where to go, what to do. Nobody's helping me. Nobody is helping me. My mom has never been on medication, ever. Nobody knows she's sick. Nobody. My dad used to hide it from the world.
Jamie, stop you now. Do me a favor and call me on Monday also, okay? And we will walk through this because we've worked up with Riverside. We have some contacts in Riverside that we might be able to get you what you need. But
nobody helps. The police come and they feed my
Jamie,
mother.
we're going to go over all this on Monday. Calm down. It's okay.
I'm sorry. It's just every day, and I don't have anywhere to go.
Jamie,
I'm sorry. I'm shaking. Yeah.
Put together the history, symptoms, and gravely disabled. Do that for me this weekend.
He's never been to the doctor for this, ever. There's no documentation anywhere for this. My mother's hid it.
Then put together the symptoms that you're observing and the gravely disabled. If she hasn't been homeless, she hasn't been hospitalized or anything else. Put together the symptoms and the gravely disabled. Call me on Monday and we will work with this and try to get the contacts that you need to be able to get her in treatment, okay?
Yo, that's some fucking weird ass shit, you know. Do you know what else is weird? My Willie.
Somebody is doing something.
Look at that.
Somebody has hacked the program.
Look at that. Look.
All right.
Round and round we go.
You're so immature.
Do you like that? I am.
I don't even know what that was. That was ridiculous.
They hacked the program. That's what they did.
I think that person needs a 5150.
Yeah, but I appreciate it, and I'll do that. I'm desperate. I've called so many people.
I will do everything I can to help you, but we'll wait till Monday if that's all right.
That's fine. I'll call you on Monday, and I even have all the recordings that she's leaving me on the message machine and everything.
Okay.
Okay.
Araceli?
Yes, I will be starting with Connie. So yes, I apologize about that. The report button is very far from reporting. I think I will put a complaint with Zoom. It should be like right next. But yes, we'll get started.
Why don't you put a complaint in this bag bit?
Oh my God.
I think
Sorry, my camera wasn't. I'm gonna come in this bag just for you, and I'm gonna send it to your. I'm gonna send it to your house.
Mr. Harold, can you please help me report this person?
No, you're not allowed. I want you to drink my come out.
Lisa, Araceli, would it be better if we all just got back on so we're not having this character coming back on?
I don't know.
We all
I don't know what name that is, so I can block them. I already removed it twice.
He keeps coming up under different people's names. That time it was Lisa, it was somebody else a moment ago. He keeps coming on. That's why I'm wondering if we all sign out, and then sign in again. Would that help?
Gail, I don't think that's going to make a difference because he still has the link. So we'd have to generate a new link or something. So,
but he may not know to sign in because he may not be listening. I don't know. Well, we'll just go on and try
this
again.
Is logged. I haven't let anybody in.
Yeah, don't let anybody else in.
So right now, like Jamie's trying to come back in, but I don't know who. I'm sorry. It's 2 people already removed, and they keep on coming back in.
Yeah, whoever it is coming in under different people's names. So, okay, well, we'll go on. Connie, hope you don't have the interruption. Keep a sense of humor, folks.
all right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll let Araceli get this up. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Connie Draxler. I am the Acting Chief Deputy Director for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. And joining me, hopefully he can be on screen momentarily, is Luis Leyva. Hope I can't see if he's on, but Luis
I'm
Leyva.
on, Connie.
All
Good
right,
afternoon,
great.
everybody.
There you are.
Hi, Luis.
He is our acting deputy director for the Office of the Public Guardian. So I just wanted to introduce him. I had served as the deputy director for the Public Guardian's office in LA for almost 13 years, I guess.
Oh.
And so now Luis is taking over in that role, and he will take over our conservatorship PowerPoint for future presentations. I'm going to do it this one last time so he can kind of see how we run through it, and then he'll be ready for the next one. So, and he's available to answer questions in the chat. All right, next slide. So today we're going to go over a lot of information. Some of it will be a repeat of what you just heard, but sometimes you need to hear it multiple times because this is complicated information and it will just help you with your understanding. So we're going to do an overview of the Office of the Public Guardian, an overview of conservatorship, including the intent, purpose, and types of conservatorship. We'll talk about conservatorship services available in LA County, including inpatient referrals, outpatient referrals, and how OPG, the Office of the Public Guardian in LA County, operates as the conservator. I'm letting you all know that I can speak to LA County. That is where I know the processes and how we handle things in LA County. I am familiar with some of the processes in Orange County, having served with the Orange County Public Guardian's office years ago, but Jim is actually probably has more information about current practices. So we really do, when we get into practices and processes, I can only speak to LA County. And if you are from another county, please note that while I will give you information about the law, which is the same for every county in California, the process of how the Behavioral Health Agency or Mental Health Department or Public Guardians act in your other counties may be different. And that's just because of resources, court processes, and things that have been long-standing, or maybe even board directives. So just want to make sure you understand that this is really, my presentation is about LA County. We will also talk a little bit about forensic cases, and then I will give you an overview about the CARE Act. This may be also known as the CARE Court legislation that is going through the state legislature right now, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So the Office of the Public Guardian, there is a public guardian or public conservator in every county in the state of California. And the public guardian or public conservator is the designated county conservatorship investigator for all LPS conservatorships. What does this mean? This means that all referrals for an LPS conservatorship must go through the public guardian's office. You, as a loved one of a family member who is suffering from a serious and persistent mental illness, cannot walk into the mental health court and file a petition to become conservator. The way that the law has been set up, and the law has been longstanding. The LPS law was created back in the late 1960s. And at that time, there was really no process in place for going to a court and placing someone in a mental institution. It was relatively easy. Anyone could write an affidavit. And so when they put the LPS law into place, they did put in place this this entity, the public guardian or public conservator, as being kind of the third party that could assess and be involved with the referrals. So all referrals must come through the public guardian's office, and the public guardian acts as the investigator on those referrals, will determine if someone meets criteria for conservatorship, and will make recommendations regarding who should serve. Referrals sent to the public guardian's office can be accepted or rejected. The public guardian's office has that discretion. What are some of the reasons why the public guardian may reject a referral? Maybe because the person is not a county resident. This is a common issue for LA County Public Guardian because we have a significant number of acute psychiatric hospitals in LA County. And if you live on the borders of LA County, it's possible that your loved one, when they are hospitalized, actually get placed in an LA County hospital. But even though they're placed in an LA County hospital, that does not mean that that referral should come to LA County. That referral actually needs to go to the county of residence, and we will reject those referrals and expect our neighboring counties or other counties to do what they are supposed to do, which is take that referral. The other reasons we will reject a referral is because there's just a lack of evidence in the referral and the declaration from the doctor. The referral is incomplete, or the referral is not legible. I will also note that even though the public guardian's office may accept a referral, and then we will petition the court can reject our petition if they feel that there is a lack of evidence in the document, and they will reject us even pursuing the case, even if we have accepted it. Next slide. So what is conservatorship? So it's a court proceeding in which someone is appointed as the legally responsible person for someone else who's unable to provide for their basic needs or manage their finances. In California, there are 3 types of conservatorship, general types of conservatorship: LPS, which is what we're going to talk about today; probate, which Gail has already explained is really for older adults that have dementia or other major neurocognitive disorders, or it also can be for individuals who are developmentally disabled. There is also the housing conservatorship. This is on the books as a pilot program that the legislature approved a couple of years ago. This was a pilot conservatorship in which San Francisco, LA, or San Diego could, but were not required to move forward with a different type of conservatorship involving individuals who were homeless. LA County elected not to pursue the housing conservatorship. San Diego looked into it but did not pursue it. San Francisco did pursue it, but they have had a very difficult time getting anyone conserved under that process. Next slide. It's a civil proceeding, so that requires proof of need. So we have to prove to the court that there is a need for the conservatorship, and it also requires individuals to attend and be involved in the court process. The LPS conservatorship court process can look a lot like a criminal court process in elements, right? We can have jury trials, we can have court trials, we have to prove a case to a certain legal standard that's the same as you have in a jury trial. So for a lot of practical reasons in the courtroom, it looks very similar to a criminal court proceeding, but it is not a criminal court proceeding. This is a civil proceeding, and we don't want anyone to think that it is a criminal court proceeding. This is a civil proceeding that has some court elements that look similar to what happens in a criminal court. Next slide. So what's some of the intent and purpose of the LPS Act? As I stated, the LPS Act was created back in the late 1960s. It really came about actually as part of the civil rights movement, in that really to bring about having a process of civil rights and due process for individuals, so that, for instance, you could just not go, lock someone up in a mental institution and throw away the key, which was kind of a reality in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. So the LPS Act was put together to end inappropriate and indefinite involuntary commitment, but to provide prompt evaluation and treatment, to provide individualized treatment, supervision, and placement, and to safeguard the individual rights through a judicial process or review, and to ensure that services are provided in the least restrictive setting. That is a tenet and an important part of the LPS Act. And then finally, it does establish the procedures for involuntary treatment, which is what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. What are the effects of conservatorship? It shifts the responsibility for making personal care and financial decisions away from the client and to the conservator, to the person that is appointed by the court. It does, in fact, impose significant limitations on the client with regards to their civil rights. For instance, it can, they may not be able to decide where they want to live. They may not be able to make decisions themselves about how they want their mental health treatment, what they accept or what they refuse. They may not be able to execute contracts. They may not be able to manage their personal finances. And in some cases, they may not be able to even make physical health decisions. Despite all of these restrictions, conservatorship may be the best guarantee of protection for and protect their client interests. There are at times individuals who need to be conserved, but one of the other important things of conservatorship is that it's a last resort. We don't go to conservatorship first. We have to find, and try other alternatives before we do get to the conservatorship. It is supposed to be the last resort. And the reason is because it takes away many of their constitutional rights that you and I, have, and they have until it's taken away as part of the conservatorship. Next slide. Just a picture of kind of the process, right? Someone who may be homeless ends up, in an interaction in which they may be 5150, they go to the hospital and the legal process, and then that last picture in the corner on the right is actually our mental health court. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the traditional inpatient conservatorship process first. This is what's happening in every county. There is an inpatient traditional way in which conservatorships are established in counties. I will then talk about the outpatient process that LA County is doing, which is not standard in other counties. So for the inpatient, the process starts with a person being placed into a designated facility. This is an acute psychiatric facility that has been designated by the local Department of Mental Health. They are designated to do involuntary holds and hold people for their mental health crises. So it starts with a 5150 or a 72-hour hold for evaluation. If necessary, the person can be held for an additional 14 days. This is the 5250. And when I talk about W&I code, I'm referencing the Welfare and Institutions Code. This is the section of the law in which the LPS Act resides. If someone, after the 14 days are up, if needed, a person can be placed on a 30-day intensive hold, which is known as a 5270. I do want to comment here, not all counties authorize the use of this hold. LA County does in fact utilize this 30-day intensive hold, but San Bernardino, for instance, does not. Utilizing the 30-day hold does require the local board of supervisors to actually authorize that use of that hold. So for LA County, an individual can be placed after the 14-day hold on the 30-day intensive. In another county where there is not that 30-day intensive hold, then the temporary conservatorship would have to be established sooner. It would have to be sent to the public guardian for the establishment prior to the end of the 14 days. In LA County, because we have all three holds available to us, the total amount of times that you can be on an involuntary hold is 47. That would be true in a county that doesn't have the 30-day intensive. It's just what they would have is a 5150, a 5250, and then the 30-day TCON instead of the 30-day intensive. Referrals for LPS investigation to LA County are usually sent at the end of the 14-day hold and the beginning of the 30-day intensive. There are deadlines for submission of referrals. We have legal requirements we must meet. One of the things that can frequently happen is that a family member may contact the department about the fact that their loved one is at a designated facility, and the hospital, for instance, may be refusing to move forward with the LPS hold or the LPS referral. And after some investigation or communication, the hospital may then elect or decides to go ahead and send that referral. But then we may be out of time. So I just want to let you know that we can't accept a referral late in the 30-day intensive hold, because we will have insufficient time to file that case with the court, provide notice to everyone that needs it, for the public guardian to investigate, and for a hearing to get scheduled. Next slide. The differentiation between a 5150 and a 5250, I see that in the chat. The 5150 is a 3-day hold. A person can only be held 3 days. So the hospital will have to decide if that person is going to be discharged before the end of the 72 hours. If they are discharged, nothing else happens. If the person needs to continue to be held, and that's a clinical decision by the hospital, then they will place the individual on an additional 14-day hold, which is the 5250. All right. So for the inpatient conservatorship, this is for individuals who have serious mental illness who require involuntary treatment. Only designated doctors and facilities can initiate LPS referrals. So the person has to be in a hospital that is designated to hold individuals on the 5150, 5250. In LA County, there are more than 40 designated facilities. This includes the jail. So the jail is allowed and permitted to send referrals to the public guardian's office. Next slide. And I'm going to thank Louis for catching the things in the chat. So I'm going to just focus on the presentation and let him do the chat. So next step, when we are doing the inpatient, there is a due process that occurs within the involuntary holds. So when an individual is placed on the 14-day hold or the 30-day hold, they get what's called a certification hearing. This is a hearing in which the hospital really has to prove that the person should continue to be held on that 14 days. Even though the hospital has placed the person on a 14-day hold, the judicial officer that hears the certification hearing could actually say, no, you've not proven your case, and you need to release the person from the hold. These are facility-based, so these are taking place in the facility, and actually they are all being done now via WebEx, so there's not even an in-person process. These are all done by video at this point. And the legal cause for continuing to hold somebody at that level is a probable cause, and that they have to prove that the person either is a danger to others, danger to self, or gravely disabled. The client is represented by the patient's rights office, and then the hospital personnel are there, and then the hearing officer who's going to hear the evidence. There's also a Reese hearing. A Reese hearing is used to involuntarily medicate individuals while they are in the acute hospital. You don't automatically get that power just because a person has been detained at a hospital. The 5150 and 5250 allows for detention in an involuntary mechanism to hold someone, but it does not automatically come with the ability to medicate. So the hospitals will have to go ahead and go to court and ask for the authority to medicate someone who is unwilling to take meds in the hospital. I will note that LA County Public Guardian, when we get a temporary conservatorship, we do not obtain involuntary medication powers as part of our TCON, and we would also have to go to court to get that power to be able to, if the hospital wanted a medication order during the temporary conservatorship. The legal basis for a Reese hearing is clear and convincing evidence. So probable cause is like your lowest level. Clear and convincing is your next level of proof that you need to do. And then we'll talk about the highest level of proof for the conservatorship hearings. These are generally facility-based if the person is on the 5250 or the 5270, the 14-day or the 30-day hold. But if it is a TCON and we're asking for that authority, then it will be held in court. But again, that's probably going to be done by WebEx. Usually we're not transporting a lot of people to court. And then there are other opportunities for the client themselves to ask for judicial relief, which by a writ, and in which they ask the court to they present evidence to say I should be immediately released from this involuntary hold. Next slide. So what is the legal basis for conservatorship? It is, you've heard the definition of grave disability, and it's is defined as the inability to provide for food, clothing, or shelter due to a mental disorder or impairment by chronic alcoholism. As Jim has said, alcoholism alone as a sole diagnosis is rarely pursued because we just don't have treatment facilities that are specific to treating alcoholism, and particularly we don't have locked facilities for that. Generally, when we're going to see alcoholism, it's usually going to be a co-occurring disorder. Other substance use disorders will come in as a co-occurring disorder, but you cannot conserve someone under LPS based on a substance use disorder only. That the primary diagnosis must be mental health. That must be the reason why we are pursuing the conservatorship. The other key element in this is that the person is unwilling or incapable of accepting voluntary treatment. Because obviously if the person can or will accept treatment, they are not gravely disabled. Next slide. So we've had someone going through the process here. That person has been 5150. They were then placed on the 14-day hold, 5250, and then placed on the 30-day intensive, and the public guardian's office gets a referral. We accept that referral, and then we go ahead and we send that referral over to the court, and we ask the court to establish what's called a TCON, or a temporary conservatorship. And the court, if the court grants it, the public guardian's office is appointed as the temporary conservator for the person only. And this is only up to 30 days. In LA County, the temporary conservatorship is running concurrent to that timeline that I spoke about earlier with the 30-day intensive. So even with the TCON, nobody can be held beyond 47 days unless we have a hearing and they allow that extension to go on. So our TCON is only up to 30 days. The hearing is required and must be done before the expiration of the TCON, which I've indicated. And while on the TCON, the public guardian's office investigator is going to review medical records, conduct a LexisNexis search for family, because we may not get any information from the hospital about family. So we're going to search records to see if we can locate family and make contact. We're going to consult with the treatment team, interview family, friends, and significant others, conduct a face-to-face interview with the proposed conservatee. And generally now we are back to doing face-to-face interviews. There were periods of time there during COVID when we would have to do a video interview with the hospital because we weren't allowed into the hospital due to COVID. And then we submit a comprehensive court report with our recommendations about whether or not conservatorship is recommended or not. And if we recommend conservatorship, we'll indicate whether or not there's someone else that can serve as conservator, or if it needs to be the public guardian. Next slide. Okay, so I really ran through quickly around the inpatient conservatorship process. And basically, you know, it's a short period of time. We're looking at about 47 days for this whole process to take place, in which your loved one is on a hold at the hospital, a referral comes to the public guardian, we accept it, there's a temporary conservatorship, there's an investigation, and then there's a court hearing. I will talk a little bit more about what happens in the court process, I think, in a few of my other slides, but I do want to tell you a little bit about our outpatient conservatorship process that we have in LA County. As Gail alluded to, there's nothing in the statute or in the law that says the referral has to come from a designated inpatient setting or from the jail. But it's generally been the way everyone has operated in every county. The law permits a conservatorship being established on an outpatient basis, but I will tell you, there is a lot of challenges associated with this process. And it is never a guarantee. It is less of a guarantee than with our inpatient process. But we have established a small program with a targeted population where we are seeing some success around our ability to get these types of conservatorships done. And I think we're probably now into our second year of doing this. So let me talk a little bit about the primary program that we have. It is our outpatient conservatorship program with our home team. This is our homeless outreach mobile engagement team in LA County. And this team, we have teams in throughout the county, but we primarily, I will say, are getting referrals from our Skid Row area and from our Hollywood area because we have psychiatrists attached to the teams. And this is where the home team goes out and does intensive outreach and engagement to the chronically homeless. Now, that's a basic service that is provided throughout the county by our home team. But for our program that we have, our outpatient program, they will also engage and are primarily focused on individuals who are chronically gravely disabled or who are kind of leaning that way, right? Or getting pretty close to meeting the criteria for grave disability. They're unable to live safely in the community and they are refusing all services. What will happen with our home team is that they are doing outreach and engagement and they are working with the client maybe months before they will even think about referring them for conservatorship. And they are trying to get them on oral medications first, and then they try to move them to a injectable medication. They are trying to get them into housing. They have a platter of services that they are providing to the client and offering to the client, making sure they've got clothing, making sure they've got food, in an attempt to get them to voluntarily engage. That is the primary goal of the program. In the event, though, that the person just will not engage and continues to refuse services on a regular basis, and there is an evaluation that they're gravely disabled, the home team psychiatrist can send a referral to the public guardian's office. We actually have a team. We go ahead and have meetings to talk about whether a case is appropriate to be referred. We try to make sure that this is the last resort, and there's a process that the home team and the public guardian's office is going through. The goal through the outpatient is that we try not to hospitalize the individual. As many of you are aware, the hospitals just really don't have any space. And I think that's one of the reasons why you will sometimes see that your loved one is not being held, maybe as long as you think they should be or as you'd like them to be. But, there is a lack of acute hospital beds available. And so we're trying to not impact the hospitals any further through our outpatient program. But if we do have to hospitalize, it is very short term and it's only for acute stabilization. And the other thing that is a little bit more unique with this is that we are trying to place within the community. Generally, an individual in an outpatient conservatorship referral is not going from the streets to a locked IMD. As Gail said, there's not really a track to make that happen. So we're going to look to place in lower levels of care and also get FSP services, the full service partnership services available with the client. Next slide. So there is a slightly different definition that comes with the outpatient conservatorship, or there's a tweak on the definition. So you still have to have that the person is unable to provide for food, clothing, or shelter due to their mental health disorder. But on top of that, the person that is making the referral, and in this case, it's our home team psychiatrist, the professional person who's recommending conservatorship must also state that these things are true. that they have examined and evaluated the person and determined that they are gravely disabled. And more importantly, they've determined it's not necessary to put them in the hospital in order to determine that they're gravely disabled. So there is a little extra piece of evidence that needs to come from our doctors. And let me just comment, because I want to go back to this idea of designated doctors. They're the professional person who can recommend is either the doctor at the designated facility or in the jail that can refer, or the professional person is from the Department of Mental Health. Professional person does not mean any psychiatrist in the community. They are not designated, they cannot refer to us. So it has to be someone that the Department of Mental Health has designated to do referrals to the Public Guardian's Office. That's how it operates in LA County. Next slide. So the home team will submit an application for the conservatorship, the referral. We can accept or deny it. If we accept that, then what happens is our investigation is done on the street, which is kind of an unusual aspect of this process. Instead of going into the hospital to meet the client, read the medical records, and do all of that, we're actually out on the streets with the home teams where the individual is homeless on the streets, and we'll be doing the interview and getting to know the client where they're at, wherever they're at. And then one of the things we'll look at is whether or not a temporary conservatorship is necessary. We're generally not doing temporary conservatorships on an outpatient. A temporary conservatorship is about being able to detain someone in a hospital. So we don't have them in a hospital. So a TCON is not an automatic with our outpatient conservatorships. We might do them if we need to get the person hospitalized. Next slide. Again, we're going to use TCON powers to initiate placement in the least restrictive setting, and the use of hospital is really limited for acute stabilization, medical clearance, because sometimes we need to get that done to get someone admitted to another level of care, or it may be used for detox if our person is also experiencing substance use disorder. We can seek a TCON for medication noncompliance. I will tell you that this has not happened very frequently in our outpatient program, outpatient conservatorship program. And then testimony is going to be done by the home team psychiatrist, and if necessary, the home team members, the public guardian deputy who's investigating the case, maybe the social workers and other team members on that homeless outreach team can also come in to testify. One of the good things about that is we can overcome what's called the Sanchez rule. There is a law, or there's a case that happened, a Sanchez case, that says that when you testify in an LPS hearing, you can only testify to what you observe. You cannot testify to what you've read in the medical record. You cannot testify to what you've heard someone else say. So one of the things that can be challenging in an LPS conservatorship case is that whoever your expert is that's testifying, that psychiatrist, that doctor, they can only testify to what they've observed. And this can be very limiting as to what evidence you can get in front of the court. Next slide. Once a permanent conservatorship is established, then a placement will be arranged. They're going to establish benefit. The public guardian will establish benefits. And nearly all of our cases in the outpatient have required the public guardian to be the conservator. The case gets transferred to our ongoing case management deputies. So the public guardian's office have deputy public guardians that can serve as an investigator, or they can serve as a case management deputy and handle the appointed cases. And that's true for any of our referrals that we get appointed on. If the conservatorship happens to be denied for any reason, home team will continue to provide services, outreach, and engagement to that client. So that is one of the nice pieces of this process, is that the home team will remain engaged with that client and try to continue to provide services to them even if they are not conserved. Next slide. So I've said this, I think a couple of times, conservatorship is a last resort, because a conservatorship removes many of the rights that we take for granted, where to live, what mental or physical health care to receive. we have to find and try all other alternatives, suitable, viable alternatives to conservatorship must be investigated or tried before the public guardian can petition or recommend a conservatorship being established. So you're going to hear a little bit later about the assisted outpatient treatment program. That is actually an alternative to conservatorship. So that is something that, if it's appropriate, if a person qualifies, we would expect that would be tried before conservatorship would be tried. I'm also going to talk about the CARE Act, the new care court process. If that legislation goes through, we would see that as being an alternative to conservatorship. Other things that, family members need to investigate or look into are the full service partnerships that are offered by, in LA County, by our Department of Mental Health, by both our directly operated clinics and our contract providers, because this is a 24/7 do what it takes type of service, and they are going to work with the client to provide them and try to help to meet their needs. So all of those things, any other option that would meet the needs. And one of the important things you need to remember here is, when we go into court, we have to prove a case is that the person is unable to provide food, clothing, or shelter. We're not going in there to prove that they have a mental illness. I mean, that's part of the evidence that's provided, but what the court is going to make a ruling on, can this person provide for food, clothing, and shelter? Talk a little bit more about that when I talk about burden of proof, but just recognize that we do need to look at all other alternatives before we get to conservatorship. Next slide. Talked a little bit about those. So not gravely disabled. So the person is able to avail themselves of food, clothing, or shelter, and they provide a suitable plan for self-care. I put suitable in quotations because, it really depends on what happens in court. A client or an individual who can present well in court, who has had enough time in the hospital to get a little bit of medication, to get a little bit of treatment, your loved one may look very different by the time we go to the hearing on the conservatorship than they did at the time that they started their 5150 and their hospitalization. Now, you could argue, doesn't that prove that they need to continue having medication and they should continue to be in some sort of involuntary process like the conservatorship? And that's one of the things we would put forward and argue. But what the court is going to look at is, okay, you've gotten some treatment, you've gotten some medication, you're in a much better space. And if the person can articulate really well that they have a plan for their food, clothing, and shelter, the court may in fact come back and say that person is no longer gravely disabled, because the court isn't always looking at history. The court can consider history. We put forward information about history. We put that in our report. That information may come up in testimony, but the court is not bound by using the history to make their decision. They will balance history with how the client is presenting in the court hearing, and they will look at whether or not today is the person gravely disabled. So I just want to caution, and I think maybe Gail kind of said it right, getting into the hospital and getting a referral to the public guardian's office isn't, you haven't overcome all the hurdles. There are more hurdles, and in many respects, those hurdles are legally based, and there is a lot of law that really kind of determines what may happen or what the judge can do, what the public guardian can do, what the public defender will do. Other alternatives are what we call third-party assistance. This is actually in the law. If an individual or an entity is willing to provide food, clothing, and shelter to the proposed conservatee, and the proposed conservatee is willing to accept that assistance, by law, they are not gravely disabled. Voluntary, so if the client agrees to accept treatment voluntarily, they are not gravely disabled. If for some reason a person would be placed out of state for a placement, this sometimes happens. Some people are familiar with this with minors. Some kids are placed out of state for treatment purposes. That's not how this works for the adults. We cannot, LPS conservatorship is only good within the state of California. It is not good outside of the boundaries of the state. And then in AWOL, and this is more about the fact that if the client would AWOL and not be available at the time of the hearing, say the initial hearing, the case will get dismissed. If at some point on a permanent conservatorship with the public guardian's office, the client is missing at least 60 days, then the public guardian will go in and terminate that case, although we will look at each case on a case-by-case basis. All right, next slide. So here is a little bit of what I've talked about in terms of proving our case. So when the public guardian actually recommends conservatorship, there can be a court trial or there can be a jury trial. And the choice is the client. The proposed conservatee gets to choose whether or not they want a court trial or a jury trial. And at either of those situations, the case has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the
Connie, may I interrupt real quick? Okay, Dr. Wong tried to get in, and because we're blocked, we can't. Araceli, can you open it up and let her get in? Araceli?
Yes. Do you know under what name? I blocked Patricia H because I don't want any more hackers in this Zoom session.
Right. This would be Dr. Lisa Wong.
Yeah, no, Lisa Wong has, I don't know if she's trying to log in.
She just texted me. She's trying to log in and cannot. I'm going to text her back and say, try again.
Ask her what name she's using, Gail, just to be sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure, it sounds like she's probably using her own, but just to be sure, since Araceli hasn't seen her name.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to keep going while you guys work on that. Interrupt me if you need to.
Okay, thank you.
So the legal burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the same burden of proof or what you would see if you were going into a criminal court trial or a criminal trial, which is where I alluded to earlier that the elements are a little bit similar to what happens in a criminal court case. So if you've ever been a juror, right, you need to sit there and determine if this, if you're going to find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, right? There can be no reasonable doubt in there. If there is reasonable doubt, the individual will not be guilty in a criminal case. The same holds true in a LPS conservatorship. If there is any doubt by the judge or the jury that the person is not gravely disabled, then the court and the jury must come back not gravely disabled. It is the highest level of proof, burden of proof that we have to do, and it's an extremely high level that we have to meet, and sometimes we don't. I mean, that is just the reality of the situation, is that we can put on the best case possible with all the evidence that we think supports the reason why we believe somebody should be conserved. And at the end of the day, the final decision will be the judge or the jury. Next slide.
Okay, hold on. Araceli, she clicked through Harold's link. Does that help? Araceli?
Yes, she can try. I have unlocked the meeting. She can try. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Connie.
No problem. So once the public guardian is appointed the conservator, and so the public guardian is going to make a recommendation who should be appointed. So if there is family or friends or other individuals involved with the proposed conservatee's life that wants to serve as conservator, public guardian will investigate to determine whether or not that person is appropriate, willing, able, and appropriate to serve as conservator. And so we can make a recommendation for someone else to be conservator. And in fact, the law states that everyone else has priority to serve as conservator over the public guardian. So not only is conservatorship a last resort option, but the public guardian is a last resort. So everyone else should serve, if they can, if they're willing and able and appropriate, should serve before public guardian accepts or recommends that we recommend ourselves to serve as conservator. But once we are appointed as conservator, we are generally going to be appointed over the person and the estate. That's not true if you are a private conservator. If you are a private or family member conservator, we're going to recommend you be appointed person only. And then if public guardian is going to handle both the estate and the person decisions and will manage the daily life and financial affairs of the conservatee. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time around these, but these are the powers that you may get from the court. The court will put, if you are appointed as conservator, the court will let you know what power or authority you have over the individual. And for those of you that might be serving in the role of conservator, you should really attend the Sunday course, which Gail puts on. That is for individuals who have been appointed as conservator. The Public Guardian's Office is also involved with that training, and we will help you with your role and responsibility being named as conservator and kind of help you through that process. One thing I will point out is that when we are talking about an LPS conservatorship, the focus of the conservatorship is mental health treatment. It does not automatically come with physical health treatment. Physical health, the client may be able to consent to some physical health treatment if the doctor believes the client has the ability to give informed consent for medical treatment. But let me just point out, no intrusive medical treatment can be done to a LPS conservatee unless the court authorizes it. So the court wants to make sure and determine if the client has capacity to consent or refuse physical health, particularly intrusive treatment, so surgery, things of that nature, must go in front of the court, and the court has to either determine the client has the ability to consent to that or says, no, the conservator can consent to that. So I just want to point that out. We spend a lot of time going back to court on medical health issues or physical health issues and getting authority to agree to treatment. I will say that includes dental treatment. Dental, particularly if you're talking about extractions or other types of procedures being done for dental care, not just cleaning, but procedures, that is considered intrusive treatment. All right, next slide. The conservatorship lasts for 1 year at a time. These are not indefinite. Prior to the expiration of the conservatorship, the treating doctor needs to evaluate, again, if the client is at that time gravely disabled, and has to do a declaration stating that the conservatorship should continue. If the doctor recommends the continuation of the conservatorship, public guardian agrees with that, then county council, we have our attorneys, which is county council, file a petition for reappointment of the conservatorship. And we start this process all over again. There's the ability for a court trial or a jury trial. There's, evidence that needs to be presented. You need to have an expert. So we go through the whole legal process again, just like you did at the initial appointment. If you are the private conservator, then you have the requirement to file that petition in court to get a hearing for a possible reappointment of the conservatorship. Next slide. Conservatorship, so public termination. So public guardian is going to request to terminate the conservatorship when the client is found by the treating psychiatrist or public guardian to no longer be gravely disabled. If the client's whereabouts remain unknown for 60 days, again, we're going to look on that on a case-by-case basis. Private conservators, if a reappointment is not filed upon the conservatorship, the conservatorship will be terminated if a reappointment is not filed by that due date on your conservatorship letters of conservatorship. So it terminates automatically by operation of law. And then upon the conservatorship termination, the conservator no longer has the legal authority to act on behalf of the former conservatee. Next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about forensic cases. These are referrals that come from the court or correctional health services, our jail. There are statutory requirements about when the public guardian can be involved, and there are more requirements now than there was in the past. And a lot of that has to do with diversion. There are a lot of new statutes or laws that have been put in place regarding diversion, and that individuals should be diverted from the criminal court system and process if an individual has a mental health disorder. The diversion programs in LA County, and this is specific to LA County, there is an office that's been created, the Office of Diversion and Reentry, who will take on cases being referred by judges and the jail to place someone in a diversion program, a mental health diversion program. And if successful in that mental health diversion program, then the individual's charges can be dismissed. So one of the advantages to this is that you could get a resolution to the criminal charges that doesn't harm the client, that it's not a charge, it's not a guilty plea, something on their record, that if they can do well in diversion, then the case can be dismissed. Assisted outpatient treatment, which Linda's going to talk about, can be used for diversion purposes. So the court can refer to AOT to see if that's a possibility. There's rapid diversion. We have programs within many of our courts in LA County that are generally for competent defendants who also have a mental health disorder, to divert them from the criminal justice system. And then we have our court linkages, or our court mental health program, where we have individuals that are in the courts working with the judge, the public defender, and the district attorney to divert individuals. Again, they may not have a mental health disorder that has led for them to be incompetent, but the court and everyone in the court is looking for an option other than this case leading to some sort of guilty plea. They're really looking for treatment for the client. I'm going to, there are a couple of times when Gail and I, that I'm going to say something differently than Gail says, and this is one of them. Gail's going to tell you that if a person goes into diversion, that they should have conservatorship at the same time. Well, we can't really do that. What the statute says is that if your loved one, particularly if they have been found incompetent to stand trial, the way the law is being written is that diversion must be tried first. If diversion is not successful, then the court can order public guardian in to look to establish the conservatorship. But we're not going to be able to establish a conservatorship concurrent or at the same time that an individual is in diversion. So just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that distinction. Next slide.
Thank you.
SB 317, let me talk a little bit about this. This is a new law that went into effect in January of this year. This applies to those individuals who have a misdemeanor and are found incompetent to stand trial. So what happens is an individual has been charged with a misdemeanor. The public defender can inform the court, I believe, that my client is competent to stand trial. There's an evaluation, and if the individual is found to be incompetent, the mental health court will have that case, and they will look to divert that client to some sort of mental health treatment. In the past, if you were found to be incompetent to stand trial for a misdemeanor, you would be placed in a competency program in which the focus of the program was to restore you to competency so that you could in fact stand trial for your charges. That part no longer exists. So the goal of the MIST program, or SB 317, is all about mental health treatment. It's all about diversion away from, and it's not about trying to get the person back to competency to stand trial for their charges. This should reduce and or eliminate stays in the jail. And the court has 4 options when they are looking at someone who is a MIST in their courtroom. They can go to mental health diversion. Frequently, if the person is in custody, they are going to be referred to the Office of Diversion and Reentry, what we call ODR. If they are out of custody, Department of Mental Health is going to manage that potential diversion court order. They could be referred to assisted outpatient treatment, or they could be referred for conservatorship if there is a report of grave disability. And it's a step process, right? First option is diversion, yes or no. If the answer is no, then the next look is AOT. Is that a possibility? Yes or no? If that's not a possibility, the next question is conservatorship. Is there any evaluation around grave disability? Yes or no? And then the other option to be that is happening and is available and happening is just an outright dismissal. So unfortunately, we are seeing cases in which an individual refuses diversion. It does not qualify for AOT or conservatorship. That case may get dismissed with no treatment options being court ordered. Next slide. Felony, the FIST. So we have the MISTs and the FISTs. We have lots of acronyms. This is the felony incompetent to stand trial. This, again, the public defender would issue a declaration of doubt saying they don't believe the client can actually stand trial. But in the felony incompetence, there still is a process of trying to restore the individual to competency so that they can stand trial. There are several options as to where an individual may go for this this competency training, which includes treatment. Let me just say that obviously you can't really help someone with their competency unless they're getting treatment. So treatment does come along with this program, court-ordered treatment. They could be going to the Department of State Hospitals, so like Metropolitan State Hospital in LA County or Patton State Hospital in San Bernardino County. They could go to a jail-based competency treatment program. There is one over in San Bernardino where LA County clients, FIST clients can go there for their treatment. It's a jail-based program. They could go to an outpatient diversion program or a community-based restoration program, again, with our Office of Diversion and Reentry. In this scenario, the only time public guardian can get involved is after the person has gone for their competency training and that entity tells the court they cannot be restored, so that we have a finding of non-restorable, and there is a clinical evaluation of grave disability. At that point, with those elements in place, the judge can order the public guardian in to investigate for a possible conservatorship. We get a lot of referrals this way. We do much of our work, to be honest with you at this point, is forensic work. We are heavily involved in misdemeanor and felony cases where the court is ordering public guardian in to investigate. Next slide. I'm going to quickly go through Care Act. So it's been called Care Court for the last couple of months, and now it's the Court Care Process or the Care Act. So I just want to give you guys some information. There's quite a few slides on this. I'm going to probably have to jump through these pretty quickly because I think we're running close to being out of time. So let me just tell you about this legislation that is currently pending up at the state. A decision has to be made by August 31st as to whether or not this legislation is going to move forward. By all accounts, we believe it will, but I just will make the caveat that it does need to get through the legislature by the end of the month, and the governor would have to sign it in September for this to become law. So what is the CARE Act? This is the Community Assistance Recovery and Empowerment Act, also known as CARE. It is formally in the legislature under Senate Bill 1338. This is a new approach to act earlier and to provide support and accountability to individuals with untreated serious mental illness, and accountability to local governments who have the responsibility to provide behavioral health services. This is a civil court proceeding. As it stands right now, it appears, and again, I'm saying this could change tomorrow. So what you are hearing is what I know today. Please understand all of this could change tomorrow in the legislature, or maybe on Monday is a better idea, because the legislature is still working through this law. As it stands right now, they are looking for counties to come into this process. This will be something that will happen in every county, but looks like there's going to be two cohorts of counties that will, two times in which a county can decide when they want to join this process. The first cohort would start in October of 2023, and this is the goal for the state, is that they want 50% of the state's population involved in the first cohort. there does need to be a year of planning. This is a pretty dramatic change in the law. This is a whole new law with a lot of intricacies. And then the second cohort would be in this December 1st, 2024. So even if it gets signed by the governor in September, we will not see this active until the October 1st, 2023, and then it's for whichever counties choose to be in the first cohort. Next slide. One of the things that this does, I just told you about SB 317. It now allows clients who are misdemeanors, it would allow clients who have a misdemeanor incompetent to be potentially referred to care court. So that it adds another option for the judge. What is the criteria for care court? Care Act. I'm gonna have to keep reminding myself the new terminology. So it's for individuals who are 18 years or older who have a serious mental illness and have a current diagnosis of schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorder. Note, this is not available to every mental health disorder there is. It is only going to be available for those individuals that have schizophrenia spectrum, so some sort of schizophrenic diagnosis, or someone with other psychotic disorder diagnosis. So for instance, bipolar is not included in this legislation, okay? The individual must be, is not clinically stabilized in ongoing treatment, and one of the following is additionally true. So there has to be these elements: that the person is unlikely to survive safely in the community without supervision, and their condition is substantially deteriorating, or they are in need of services and supports to prevent relapse or deterioration that would lead them to being gravely disabled, and participation in care court in a care plan or care agreement is the least restrictive option, and that the person is likely to benefit from the program. So that's the criteria that the person must meet for a petition to be filed. Next slide. The petition can be filed in the county where the respondent lives or where the respondent is found. But let's say that the person is found in LA County, but they really reside in Alameda County. Then the case would need to, it could start in LA County, but it would need to be transferred to Alameda County. And then it can also be done where the person is facing criminal or civil proceedings. Who can petition? It is pretty widespread who can file the petition in court. It's a person with whom the respondent resides, a spouse, any kind of family member can file the petition, the director of the hospital where the person is hospitalized, the director of a public or charitable organization that has provided treatment in the last 30 days or is currently providing treatment, any licensed behavioral health professional who has been providing treatment in the last 30 days or is currently providing treatment to someone, a first responder who has had repeated interactions and multiple attempts to engage the client. So it's not like the firefighter who has had one interaction with the client, but it could be a fire department who has had multiple interactions with an individual. They could potentially petition. The director of the County Behavioral Health Agency, so in LA, that's DMH. The director of APS can file a petition. The director of California Health Services program for tribes, for our American Indian tribes. The respondent themselves can petition, so a client themselves can ask to be placed into the care program. Next slide. Oh, and the public guardian can. I don't know, I think I may have missed that off of the list, but the public guardian can also file a petition. So the petition must include facts about the petitioner's allegation that the person meets criteria, and they have to have this additional evidence attached to it, an affidavit by a licensed behavioral health professional who has examined the respondent within 60 days and determines the person meets criteria, or evidence that the person has been detained a minimum of twice on a 5250, but the most recent one has to be within 60 days. Next slide. There are due process requirements in this process, just like there is in conservatorship or AOT. You can look at these later. Next slide. here's my process. And I don't know, Araceli, if you can make that a little bit bigger, because it's our draft of what we think the care court process is going to look like. So a petition, so this is draft, this is not final, this is our visualization about what we think the process will look like. Again, this could all change. And one of the things I want everyone to know is that once the law is signed, and once LA County, for instance, determines what cohort they're going to be in, there will be a process to determine how it all works out. We'll spend the next year working with the court on coming up with the paperwork, everything that needs to be done. And any county that's going to be in the first cohort or the second cohort will go through that process between the Department of Mental Health or Behavioral Health and the court and the community to kind of work this out. So quickly, I'll just say the petition is filed. The court will review the petition and determine if it meets basic eligibility. If it does not, it's automatically will be appointed for the respondent, for the person who is being considered for being in the program. And I'm getting some feedback, so if you can